and types of questions that will appear on A-Level Sociology Paper One. If you're looking for more detail on each specific question type, then please see those videos that look at a particular question type in more detail with worked examples. When you enter the exam hall and find your seat, you will be required to complete the information on the cover sheet. Your exam booklet will include the questions and space underneath each one to write your answers. If you need extra paper, then please ask the invigilator, and if you are continuing your answer beyond this initial booklet, then please make a note of this so that the examiner knows to continue marking your answer. Underneath the section for your name, you'll also see this on the front sheet of your exam paper. You must answer all of the 6 questions on paper 1, and they will be on these 3 areas. As you can see, questions 1 to 4 will be on education and are worth 50 of the 80 marks available. Question 5 on methods in context worth 20 marks, and there will be one question, number 6, on theory and methods that is worth 10 marks. You also have an overview of the question command words here as well. Since all of your A-Level Sociology papers are 2 hours long and are each marked out of 80, then we can apply the general timing rule of 1.5 minutes per mark, and we'll look at this with each separate question. Questions 1 to 4 on the education section of paper 1 will come from the specification. You might be more familiar with the language used in the checklist though, so you may prefer to use that. For instance, the first bullet point here refers to theories of education such as the functionalist, Marxist, feminist and postmodernist view on its role and functions. But make sure that you are familiar with the words used here as well, because it's reasonable to expect that the examiner will use them in your exam. There will be 2 short answer questions on education. Question 1 is worth 4 marks and question 2 is worth 6 marks. The timing rule applied to these 2 questions would be 6 minutes for question 1 and 9 minutes for question 2, but you might find that they don't actually take this long, meaning that you can spend more time on some of the longer questions later on. The command outline means to set out the main characteristics, and you will be asked to outline 2 or 3 causes, criticisms, advantages, disadvantages, effects, factors, ways, features, functions, problems, or reasons. Since this question is worth less than 10 marks, you do not have to write in continuous prose. In other words, you are allowed to use bullet points to answer these 2 questions. You get 1 mark per factor, way, reason, etc. So you can start by identifying or stating this for 1 mark, and then explain the point you have just stated or identified, making sure that it does answer the question set for the extra plus 1 mark. You need to do this twice in question 1 and 3 times for question 2. It would be a good idea to leave a blank line between each of your 2 or 3 parts of your answer. Remember, you do not need any named studies in your response to either of these 2 questions. To give you an idea of how much you should be writing for these questions, you should also take into account the number of lines given to the exam in the exam booklet, which will look like this for question 1 and question 2, where each of these is a sheet of A4 paper. Question 3 on paper 1 will be on education and will always start with the command words applying material from item A, analyse 2. It is worth 10 marks and you should spend 15 minutes on this question. If you want to break the timing down even further, then your 15 minutes for 2 paragraphs becomes 7.5 minutes for each one. Please follow the advice given here. The item has a number of hooks that you are required to develop explicitly, and you might find it easiest to start each of your 2 separate paragraphs with a direct quote from the item. You need to use your quote as a launchpad for your response, with reference to relevant sociological concepts, examples, named studies, evidence, theory, and theorists where necessary. Evaluation is rewarded if it's in context. The key thing here, though, is to make sure that everything you write about in each paragraph links clearly to and develops the question asked. To give you an idea of what this looks like in the exam with regards to space, you can see here that this question takes up 2 pages of A4 paper in the booklet, exactly like this. Question 4 on paper 1 will be on education and will always start with the command applying material from item B and your knowledge, evaluate. It's the question with the highest number of marks, in this case 30. Therefore, using the 1.5 per mark rule, you should be spending 45 minutes on this question in total. As always, read the question and item very carefully, paying close attention to the wording of the question, looking out for specific words and phrases. Be careful to spot, for example, if the question asks you about social groups, this means you must talk about at least more than one. The item for this question will give you an outline of what to include in the question and gives you an overall guide, but don't limit your answer to just what is stated in the item. You're expected to cover more points, issues, perspectives, and so on. You can quote and develop the item, but it's not a requirement in the same way that it is for the 10-mark question number 3. If you do use the item, you must put it in quotation marks and explain, expand, or use it to launch a point. I'll look at the specific parts of this essay later on, but for the moment just be aware that your response to this question is in the form of a standard essay. That means you begin with an introduction, have a main body, and then finish with a conclusion. At the most basic level, since the command word is always evaluate, this question requires you to discuss the view in the essay title, then look at least one different perspective, reason, cause, view, etc. and make sure that you're using what is broadly described as sociological evidence, as noted in the last part above. Concepts, examples, evidence, findings from named studies, theories, and theorists where necessary. Disclaimer, other paragraph structures exist. I think this one is particularly useful though because it hits the assessment objectives, and therefore using this PERC or PERC framework is one way of getting into the top mark band. Remember, you need paragraphs in support and against the view in the essay title. To give you an idea of what this looks like in the exam with regards to space, you can see here that question 4 takes up 5 pages of A4 paper in the booklet, exactly like this and this. Question 5 will be on research methods in context. Here you have to apply your knowledge of research methods to the study of education. The command in this question is as stated and is worth 20 marks. Therefore, you should spend 30 minutes answering this question. The specification lists the following research methods that could be added to the insert method here part of the question. But please note, these are prefaced by the word including, which means other methods can be discussed, such as case studies and longitudinal studies, and it's also important to remember that there are variations within methods, such as interviews, that can be structured, unstructured, semi-structured, or conducted as group interviews. The second part of the question will be related to an issue in education, and I've given some examples of what the issue might be, but this list does not include all of the possibilities that could be included here. The key for this question is to make some specific applications of strengths and limitations of the method to the study of the particular issue in education. You can learn some of the characteristics of the research setting, groups involved, and context, but you get the most marks for making specific statements about the suitability or not of the method for the particular issue. The structure of your response here is not as important as it is for other questions because your examiner will be marking your response statement by statement. As a general rule though, start with a brief definition of the method and then in the main body apply the strengths and then the limitations of the method to the issue before finishing with a conclusion. Questions 6 on paper 1 will be on theory and methods, and as always the question will come from the specification. It's also worth noting that this question type on theory and methods will also appear as question 5 on paper 3 as well. At Queen Mary's College we separate the teaching of material related to theory and methods into Year 1 and Year 2 topics. This means that for your end of Year 1 exams, your 10-mark question on theory and methods could come from any of those areas highlighted in yellow. But by the end of Year 2 and your final exams, it could include any of these, either yellow or pink in this case. These are Year 2 topics, but for reference note this is another potential area of the specification that you may be asked about as a 10-mark question in paper 1 and paper 3. You could be asked about research methods, and as stated with question 5, remember that you can also be asked about the variations of each of these methods. These are some examples of the types of questions that have previously appeared, either as question 6 on paper 1 or as question 5 on paper 3. The command will always be outline and explain 2, and they're all worth 10 marks. Again, the questions highlighted in yellow relate to Year 1 content and the pink for Year 2 content. Although, as you do more theory methods in Year 2, your examiner will be anticipating some of that material in your final exam response. With reference to the exam booklet, this is how much space you are allocated for question 6. As you can see, this is 2 sides of A4 paper. The timing rule for this question 6 is to spend 15 minutes on it since it's worth 10 marks. In many ways, it's similar to the other 10-mark question on this paper, except that it is on a different topic and there is no item. If the question is asked you to outline and explain two either disadvantages or advantages or problems of a research method, then you need to state what that is, and then develop this in the rest of the paragraph with sociological concepts, examples, and findings from studies where necessary to illustrate your points. For your second paragraph, you need to repeat the process with a second point. Make sure that this is different from your first one, and as a final reminder, please note that the examiner's report states there are no marks for evaluation for this question. Remember, this presentation has been an overview of Paper 1. If you need more specific detail on each question type, then please see those separate videos.